set.
Camera speed.
Sound production, take one.
Action!
Welcome to From Beneath the Hollywood Sign. If you love old movies, Hollywood history, or the golden age of filmmaking, you've come to the right place. This is the podcast that talks about amazing stories of Tinseltown from another era. Hear fascinating conversations with writer-producer Steve Cubine, who quite literally lives just beneath the Hollywood sign, and actress-writer Nan McNamara. Now your hosts, Steve and Nan.
Welcome, everyone. Steve, it's the most magical time of the year. Wait, no, it's the most wonderful time. Magical, wonderful, I don't know. Either way, it's Christmas season.
I'm telling you, Christmas is nipping at our little booties.
It is indeed. And last year, we talked about some of our more obscure favorite Christmas movies. This year, we did something kind of fun. We each picked 2 movies. We each went out and did some research on fun facts about these 4 films, and we haven't shared what those fun facts are. And these are movies that listeners, we are certain you have seen probably multiple times.
They're all iconic Christmas movies.
But instead of talking about them, we've decided to come up with some fun facts for all your cocktail parties during the holiday season. You can share these little tidbits.
So when you're being kissed under the mistletoe, you might want to throw out a little tidbit about one of these movies.
Exactly. So why don't you kick it off, Steve?
Well, the movie I want to talk about is, and what I think is the best and my favorite version of A Christmas Carol.
Yes.
Of course, we all know the Charles Dickens classic, A Christmas Carol. It was actually a novella written in 1843 by Dickens. Well, when MGM decided to make a film version of it in 1938, they engaged director Edwin L. Marin, who really envisioned Lionel Barrymore in the lead role of Scrooge. I don't think a lot of people knew that.
Oh, I can see that.
Lionel Barrymore was that's who they wanted, that's who they offered it to, that's who they envisioned.
And he said no?
Well, he had played Scrooge annually in a radio program. He did it every single year. So he was just the natural go-to guy to play Scrooge in this MGM version. But he suffered from severe arthritis, and he had suffered a hip injury that caused him to be wheelchair bound, which is why he's in a wheelchair in It's a Wonderful Life. You'll know later.
Yes.
But because of his injuries and just health issues, he said no. He said, I can't really do it. I'm not in good shape. So he's the one who actually went to MGM and said, since I can't do it, you should talk to my friend Reginald Owen. And Reginald Owen's a British actor, not that well known in the United States, definitely known mostly for A Christmas Carol, but it was Lionel Barrymore who suggested Owen.
How lovely of him.
I know, which is kind of fun. So I don't know if a lot of people know that it was supposed to be Lionel Barrymore. We all know the MGM version. It was produced by Joseph Mankiewicz, and it was written by Hugo Butler. The film version was a much, much more family-friendly and almost glamorized version of the original book. Gone were some of the darker, grimmer elements of the book, like these ghosts who wail outside of Scrooge's window all night, and these 2 starving children called Want and Ignorance, who hid within the folds of the Ghost of Christmas Present's robe.
Yes.
So there were all these dark elements in the novella that MGM, being MGM, decided that's just too dark.
Which is really losing the whole point of the story.
It kind of is.
Yeah.
But it's MGM. They want everything to be sparkly and pretty and fun with a bow on it.
Right.
I found that interesting, how they took out all the darker elements of the story. They also glammed up, and this is kind of personal to me, they glammed up the role of the Ghost of Christmas Past. Normally in the novella, it's just kind of this nondescript ghost, they call it. But MGM being what it is, of course, they cast beautiful Anne Rutherford, my fairy godmother. She played the Ghost of Christmas Past. They plopped a blonde wig on her head. I don't know why. And actually, I've had conversations with Anne about that, and she's not sure why either. Because I asked her, I said, why did they put you in a blonde wig for that?
What's the concept?
And she had no idea. She goes, it was just the director's vision.
Okay.
He thought she needed to be a blonde.
Okay.
Which makes no sense. But talking to her about the production and filming, she did say that she absolutely loved Reginald Owen. She said that he was just a delightful man, that he made every day fun on set. And the thing that was most memorable to her were the scenes where she and Reginald Owen are flying to go see the past.
Yes, yes.
And so apparently Anne didn't love heights, and so they had to put her in this harness and Reginald Owen and lift them up to the rafters on one of the sound stages at MGM.
Okay.
And that's how they shot the flying scene. They had wires that they took out later.
Yes.
And she hated it.
I bet she did. And back in the day, I would be worried too that the safety issues, there's not as many protocols.
Right. Where's that stunt coordinator?
I know, right.
Who's checking those
Nobody.
wires?
Yeah.
And another thing that they did, that they softened up the movie and they added a little romantic element, was they beef up the romance between Elizabeth and Fred Scrooge, who is Ebenezer's nephew. In the book, they're just an old married couple. But in this version, they wanted to add they're not quite married, they're still courting, there's romance, and, love in the air, which I thought was a nice element for the book.
It is.
And in fact, Fred becomes much more significant in the film than he is in the book.
Okay.
He has a much bigger part and a much bigger influence on Scrooge in the movie. And also in the book, which I wish I'd kept this in, Scrooge has a fiancée named Belle who breaks his heart.
Yes.
She breaks off their engagement in the book. It kind of broke his heart, and it sort of explained why he turned so dark.
Yes.
And why he turned so bitter, and why he became the Scrooge that we all know.
Right.
Another fun fact about A Christmas Carol, it was the one and only movie that featured the great character actor Gene Lockhart and his wife, Kathleen Lockhart, and their real-life 13-year-old daughter, June Lockhart, who we all know June Lockhart went on to be the mother in Lost in Space and Lassie.
What a famous acting family,
They
right?
were. They were kind of a well-known acting family, and it's the one time they all got to be in a movie together, which is kind of fun.
Very cool.
And June, she went on to have a fantastic career. She was in Sergeant York in 1941. She did Meet Me in St. Louis, 1944. She-Wolf of London, 1946. So I kind of love that. And Gene Lockhart, this is kind of a cool little tidbit, he went on to be in another classic, iconic Christmas movie. Do you remember which one it was?
Classic, iconic Christmas movie.
Yeah, you'll remember it the minute I say it. He was the judge in Miracle on 34th Street.
Yes, he was.
1947.
He's such a great actor. I love him.
Such a great actor. One fun thing about the movie was it was originally intended to be released in 1939, but it really got rushed into production. So they went into production in October of 1938. They finished in 6 weeks, and it was one of the fastest films to ever be made. It opened in theaters December 1938. so
they
crazy.
That is
crazy
amazing.
schedule.
That is amazing.
So that's sort of the fun of A Christmas Carol.
Yeah. People are very passionate about their various favorite versions of A Christmas Carol.
People are so passionate about the 51 version with
Alistair Sims. I love Alistair Sims. I
and it's
do
a
love
great
that one.
version. Don't get me wrong. I just
but
prefer
I love
that.
Reginald Owen, too.
Yeah. I like the
And
MGM glam to my Christmas Carol.
I want a little shiny on my Christmas Carol.
I want a little, I want a red bow at the end.
All right, well, talking about shiny, the one I'm going to talk about is Christmas in Connecticut, 1945.
One of my favorite Christmas movies.
Oh, me too. Directed by Peter Godfrey, who I did not know. He started actually as an actor and a director. He directed over 200 plays in London's West End.
Oh, I had no idea.
Isn't that amazing?
Wow.
So I think everybody has seen this, but just in case, the premise is Elizabeth Lane, Barbara Stanwyck, is a food writer. She's been fooling her readers and her publisher, Sidney Greenstreet, into thinking she is this perfect cook and housewife and mother. And a returning war hero, Dennis Morgan, is invited to spend Christmas at her home, and she has to create this life that doesn't exist. Now, I didn't realize, guess who was originally cast in that role?
In the Barbara Stanwyck role? Oh, who was it? Ginger Rogers?
Betty Davis.
Oh, I don't think I did know that.
Which is a very strange thing. I couldn't find any reason why she left the role, but she was replaced by Barbara Stanwyck.
Oh, wow.
This was Barbara Stanwyck's 48th film. Think about that, 1945, and she'd already made 48 films. She said when she was interviewed in 1988 that she particularly enjoyed making Christmas in Connecticut because, quote, I didn't kill anyone in that picture. She says, in spite of the fact that I've always loved to kill on screen, it was a pleasant change of pace for me. It gave me another chance to do comedy. Of course, this is referring to the fact that she had just finished Double Indemnity, 1944, which she was nominated for an Academy Award for Best Actress as that scheming seductress, Phyllis Dietrichson.
What different roles.
I know, back to back.
Talk about showing your range.
Oh, my goodness. And Christmas in Connecticut was shot 5 years after another holiday classic that we've talked about on this podcast that she was in, Remember the Night.
Remember the Night.
Yeah.
I love that movie.
Yeah. The film was the second second major hit in a row for Dennis Morgan, who plays her love interest following his role in God is My Co-Pilot. I didn't realize this, but during the 40s, he was briefly the highest paid actor at Warner Brothers. Well, according to sources that I read, he was originally cast as Rick in Casablanca.
I have read this, yes.
And he made Thank Your Lucky Stars in 1943 instead. He is a Wisconsin native, and he actually milked the cows, which were present on set during the film's shooting. Is that not crazy?
Just for kicks?
Well, I think they needed to be milked.
Oh, for on camera.
On camera, and I think they needed to be milked.
Because you got to take care of the cows.
Got to take care of the cows. But speaking of Casablanca, there are actually 2 Casablanca alumni in this film, Sidney Greenstreet and S.Z. Cuddles Sakal. So Greenstreet's playing a rare comedic role. Sakal is who played the sentimental waiter in Casablanca. He's playing Stanwyck's Uncle Fritz. He's the brains and talent behind all of the delicious meals. In real life, Sakal apparently, he's from Hungary, hated American food. And his wife would come to work with him every day, stay in his dressing room, and she made his lunch every day with Hungarian delicacies.
Goulash and such.
By the way, Cuddles, his nickname, was the invention of Jack Warner, who insisted that Sakal be credited that way. SZ hated the nickname, but from everything I read about him, he was apparently as cuddly and lovely off-screen as he was on-screen.
I've read that too, that he was just a teddy bear.
Yeah. Another Jack Warner story associated with this film, Warner was apparently on a cost-cutting kick as this film was filmed during wartime. So the mink coat that Stanwyck's character pulls out of a box as a reward for herself, apparently it's the same mink coat that Joan Crawford used in Mildred Pierce. Reginald Gardner plays Stanwyck's would-be husband. Next time you watch the film, watch what he does with his left hand. He has a really interesting physical quirk. He keeps his left hand in his pocket in virtually every scene, even when he's running up the stairs. According to his friend, David Niven, Gardner had mangled his hand when he fell. I'm not laughing about the fact that he fell, but why he fell. Head first down an iron fire escape where he had been chasing Hedy Lamarr. I couldn't find any other details about that encounter, so we'll just leave that to our imagination.
Okay, I have such a visual image going on. Yeah, that's great.
Gardner apparently reported to Warner Brothers for work on this picture after just doing a USO tour in the Arctic Circle. And some of the publicity material I found said he became very snow conscious, so much so that he hardly noticed the more than 10 tons of manufactured snow that was needed for filming the picture. The set of the farmhouse where you just want to move in when you see this.
Oh, yes.
Built on the Warner Brothers lot, apparently same farmhouse was used in Bringing Up Baby in 1938. And the entire runaway sled scene was filmed on sound stages in Warner Brothers on the back lot with snowdrifts being simulated by soap flakes.
It was amazing, really, how they could create such elaborate outdoor settings on a soundstage.
It is. It truly is. You would never believe that it was there. There's also some really interesting dolly work. Now, if you don't know what a dolly is, it's that wheeled platform that a camera is mounted on to create smooth camera transition. So it's mounted on like railroad tracks.
Yeah.
In Christmas in Connecticut, this camera runs through 4 or 5 rooms in the farmhouse, and it's because director Godfrey, with his roots as a theater director, he was a fan of using it to promote continuity in the story. So the dolly on this film even had a nickname. They called it the Tunerville Trolley. I don't know why.
Tunerville
Trolley. And both the camera and the mic boom just followed the actors from room to room without interruption of dialogue. One other fun little fact, the plot, as you remember, involves her pretending that she has a baby. Remember that?
Yeah, so, and she borrowed the baby from the neighbor, which was...
Yes.
And then the baby changes. And
yes, exactly. Well, this was new back in the day. They came up with the solution, which is now what they do all the time, of using twins. It was one of the first times that they did that. I mentioned the cows. There is a scene in the kitchen involving a cow sticking its head through the Dutch door. I don't remember that scene. So the action is that Stanwyck and Morgan are in the kitchen and they discover the cow sticking his head or her head through the door, and then they lead the cow out to the barn. So the actors were on their marks, ready to go. The cow was on his or her mark, ready to go. And then the soundstage bell would ring to say, silence, we're rolling. Every time the bell would ring, the cow would back out of frame. So they would try again, and they would ring the bell, and the cow would back out of frame. This went on and on. Finally, the handler had to lay down out of camera range and hold the back haunches of the cow so that it would stay in place until the right time. So I thought
so
that was
funny. I wonder what it was about that bell that made the cow back out.
It just scared him. Yeah. This film was shot in the summer, May to July 1944. It was shot in 45 days. 4 days ahead of schedule. It premiered on August 8th. Interesting that a Christmas movie would premiere in August.
Yeah, wonder what the rationale was behind releasing a Christmas movie in August.
Well, I think part of it was wartime. And I think they were looking for something to
boost the morale of the soldiers.
Lift spirits. Yeah. It premiered actually in Connecticut, in Norwalk, Connecticut. Yes. Warner Brothers threw an elaborate premiere, including a Christmas parade that drew 20,000 spectators. It made $3 million at the box office, one of Warner Brothers' biggest hits that year. You may recall there was a remake in 1992 with Diane Cannon and Chris Christopherson. Directorial debut by Schwarzenegger.
Yes.
He never directed again. And that's all I'm going to say.
And there's probably a reason for that.
Yes.
If you've seen that movie, you'll get it.
Yes, you'll get it. One final thing. Stanwyck is quoted as saying, "Never in my wildest dreams did I think this film would be resurrected every holiday season. Obviously, from the letters I've received, the public enjoyed it then and still does. That pleases me."
Oh, how lovely.
I know. I love that. Well, I think it's time for this week's Hollywood Pop Quiz. And can I just...
Yeah, let's mix it up.
Can I do it?
Do it. Yes.
All right.
What you got?
The song White Christmas appears in how many films? And bonus points if you can name the films that the song White Christmas is featured in.
Oh, good question. I've got 2.
Okay.
I'm struggling with any more beyond 2.
Oh, I bet you'll figure it out.
Okay.
All
good
right.
question.
Okay, now you get to do the other thing.
All right. And so we'll be back soon with more Christmas movies and fun tidbits about them.
All right, you know the drill. Steve and Nan will be right back, but first another stop on the Hollywood tour. In just a minute, Steve will be talking about the classic holiday film, It's a Wonderful Life. That 1946 film stars, of course, Jimmy Stewart, Donna Reed, and a host of other stellar actors. Well, while working on the script, director Frank Capra visited the picturesque town of Seneca Falls in upstate New York. Many people believe this was his inspiration for the Bedford Falls we know on screen. Although there's nothing to support this in any of the materials of the Frank Capra archive, Seneca Falls has embraced its connection to the movie. It even calls itself the real Bedford Falls. The town hosts an annual It's a Wonderful Life event in December, and original cast members appear and sign autographs. The town also has a tribute museum just for the movie. Pretty cool, huh? Now back to Steve and Nan from Beneath the Hollywood Sign.
Welcome back, everyone. Before we get into more fun tidbits about Christmas movies, we wanted to give a shout out to this week's Listener of the Week, Jessica Smith. Thank you so much for catching up with all of our episodes. You're one of our newest listeners, and we so appreciate your comments and that you're a new fan of the podcast.
Thank you, Jessica.
All right, you're up.
All right, so the next movie that I want to talk about is everybody's Christmas favorite, It's a Wonderful Life,
yes.
1947. And of course, we all know the story of George Bailey, who dreams of a big, exciting, glamorous life, but he ends up staying in his hometown where he's got the most incredible wife and family and friends and family and community, but he doesn't really appreciate it until he's given the opportunity to see what his life would have been like had he never been born through a wingless angel named Clarence. It's a classic movie. We all love it. It's been remade with Marlo Thomas, I remember, in the TV version, but it's just an iconic story. So hopefully we'll come up with some tidbits that you don't know about. Well, the first thing that, I don't know that a lot of people know this, but it was based on a short story and a booklet called The Greatest Gift, written by Philip Van Doren Stern in 1939, and he ended up self-publishing it in 1943. And it's loosely based on Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol.
That makes sense.
Which you can kind of tell
you can see the
thematically
themes, yeah.
that there's certainly elements there that are based on A Christmas Carol. It was originally bought by RKO Pictures for $10,000 for a potential vehicle for star Cary Grant.
Oh.
Cary Grant was intended to be George Bailey.
I can see that.
Which would have been interesting. He would have been great. But while they were trying to develop it for Grant, RKO ended up commissioning 3 versions of the script. One was written by Mark Connelly, who had once been a member of Dorothy Parker's Round Table.
Oh, wow.
Which is kind of interesting.
Yeah.
One was written by the future blacklisted screenwriter Dalton Trumbo.
Yeah.
And then the other one was written by playwright Clifford Odets.
Oh, my gosh.
So some really pretty impressive
Heavy hitters,
writers got a first first crack at this story. However, none of their versions were considered satisfactory.
Okay.
And so RKO was not happy with any of the scripts, so it was never made with Cary Grant. The early versions of the script were definitely darker, bleaker, and one of them even had a dual George. One was a good George and one was a bad George. Which is fun. And at one point they physically fight for George's soul. So it was definitely more metaphoric and deeper
mystical,
and mystical. RKO didn't go for that.
Okay.
That was too esoteric for them, I think. So while all three of these scripts have elements that we recognize from the final version that was filmed, all miss the mark in explaining the reason for George's suicide and why he had these suicidal thoughts and creating the warmth and the community of the town of Bedford Falls. That was missing from these earlier versions, which are such key elements to the final version. All three of these scripts are now housed at the Capra Archives at Wesleyan University in Middleton, Connecticut. Well, after that, Frank Capra bought the rights. He commissioned husband and wife writing team Francis Goodrich and Albert Hackett to write the new script. But behind their backs, Capra actually went and made changes to their script along with the writer Joe Swirling, which did not please the married couple of Goodrich and Hackett very well.
Yeah.
And the final screenplay is actually credited to Hackett, Goodrich, and Frank Capra with additional scenes by Joe Swirling.
Okay.
So
they worked that out.
They worked that out. Well, the next thing I want to get into is the casting, because I always love good stories about casting.
Yes.
We know that it was meant for Cary Grant. Didn't work out. But of course, Frank Capra knew the only person to play this role was Jimmy Stewart.
Of course.
Yeah, he'd worked with him twice before in You Can't Take It With You, 1938, and Mr. Smith Goes to Washington in 39. So that was his one and only choice. There were no second choices. There was no list. There was no...
Yeah.
It was Jimmy Stewart or bust.
Perfect sense.
And Jimmy Stewart saw the value in the script and immediately signed on board. Well, Frank Capra also wanted another frequent co-star of his, Jean Arthur, to play Mary Bailey, the wife. But
I can see that.
Jean was, she was a complicated woman, a complicated actress, painfully shy. She had bouts of stage fright that were just debilitating. She had just dropped out of the Broadway run of Born Yesterday due to exhaustion, as she said, but many people think it was her nerves, that she just couldn't handle the pressure.
Yeah.
So when she was offered the role from Frank Capra, she immediately turned it down because she wasn't in the headspace to take on this role.
Sure.
Well, he was next interested in Olivia de Havilland, but Warner Brothers refused to loan her out.
Okay.
In her autobiography, Ginger Rogers says that she was actually offered the role, but she passed. She thought the role was too bland. But I haven't been able to find any other corroborating source that she was actually offered the role. So take that with a grain of salt.
Okay.
But it is in her autobiography. Frank Capra also considered Martha Scott for the role and Anne Dvorak before he finally decided on little-known MGM actress Donna Reed, who wasn't very well known at the time of the casting. And of course, she ended up being the perfect Mary Bailey.
And she found in that role whatever Ginger Rogers didn't see.
Totally. I mean, she elevated that role to something so spectacular. Maybe it wasn't on the page.
Yeah,
she was just perfect. And it just, to me, I love it because the real Donna Reed was an Iowa farm girl. So she was perfect for this movie. For the evil Mr. Potter, Capra considered every great character actor in town. He thought about Charles Coburn and Walter Abel and Leon Ames and Raymond Massey and Henry Hall, Edward Arnold, even Vincent Price.
Wow, those are all interesting choices.
I know they would have changed, I think, the dynamic quite a bit, but it would have been interesting to see each of their take on Potter. But he eventually went with Lionel Barrymore, who he had previously worked with in You Can't Take It With You in 1938. And he, of course, ended up being the letter perfect evil Mr. Potter. Now, for the role of Violet Bick, the town tramp, as I like to call her, although she was a nice girl, but
she was a nice girl.
A little
she just
misguided.
Yeah.
He considered Iris Adrian, Isabel Jewell, Myrna Dell, and Veta Ann Borg. I think all of those would have been interesting, but there was nobody better than Gloria Graham.
No, she's perfection.
And the way she got cast was really interesting, too, because the casting director, a guy named Bill Grady, was watching screen tests in his office, and Frank Capra walked in and saw Gloria Graham's screen test and flipped out. He said, "Who is this girl? She's perfect to play Violet Bick." So the rest is history.
These chance encounter castings, it's amazing.
Yeah, I love it. Well, for the role of George's mother, Ma Bailey, Bailey. He considered our lovely Anne Revere. She was on the short list for that.
She would have been good.
She would have been great. And Selena Royale, who I love, and Kathleen Lockhart, who we had just talked about from A Christmas Carol. They were on the short list. But ultimately, the part went to Beulah Bondi, of course, who had played Jimmy Stewart's mom in Of Human Hearts, 1937, and Vivacious Lady, 1938. Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, also 1938. And she would later go on to play his mother in his TV series, The Jimmy Stewart Show, from 1971 to 1972. And then the final bit of casting, which I love, is Jimmy the Raven. Does everyone remember in the savings and loan office, they had a pet raven that was just behind the counter along with Mary Treen and the other workers?
Of course.
Well, he was actually a good luck piece that Frank Capra had used before, and he wanted to find a way to get Jimmy the Raven into this movie because he thought he brought him good luck. So he rewrote the script to incorporate Jimmy the Raven in these savings and loan scenes, which was kind of fun.
That's very fun.
And Jimmy the Raven ends up making appearances in future Frank Capra movies as well. So keep an eye out for Frank Capra movies.
Jimmy the Raven.
Look for that raven.
Okay.
So now I want to talk about the locations a little bit. You
Okay.
know, we all know It's a Wonderful Life took place in the winter, lots of snow. Well, the filming actually took place in the heat of the spring and summer of 1946 at the RKO Radio Picture Studios in Culver City, California, and the 89-acre RKO Movie Ranch in Encino, where the Bedford Falls city was built using the sets from this 1931 epic called Cimarron. So they recycled sets, created Bedford Falls in the heat.
Cool. Yeah. They all were shot in the heat. It's so interesting.
Exactly. So to capture that snowy look of Bedford Falls, RKO Studios head of special effects, Russell Shearman, developed a new compound using water, soap flakes, foamite, which I don't even know what that is, and sugar to create this chemical snow for the film. And it was pumped through wind machines to create the illusion of falling snow. And it was very effective. And he had just won an Oscar the year prior for this advanced technology of snow.
Wow.
Which is very interesting.
Better than using asbestos, right?
Well, I was going to say before that, they did use things like asbestos and, horrible toxic chemicals to create snow. So glad he got the toasted flakes and the soap.
Yes, yes.
On the day they shot the snowstorm scene of It's a Wonderful Life, when George is going through the town.
Running through the town, yeah.
Yeah, it was actually 90 degrees outside. So think about that for those poor actors. Over the course of time, this is a good question. I'll see if you know the answer to this, Nan. What do you think was the one, and this is not location related, what do you think is the one issue that people used to write Frank Capra about the most concerning It's a Wonderful Life? What was their one beef with the movie that they just kept writing him letters?
The pool?
Good guess, though. Which is kind of interesting, too. That set actually still exists in Beverly Hills High School. That's an actual
where they
set.
shot
It's
it.
still there. And another little tidbit that people may not know, the guy who pulls the lever that causes the dance floor to open up in the pool,
yes.
it was another famous child actor. Do you know who
I
it was?
do. It was Alfalfa.
Yes, it was Alfalfa from the Our Gang comedies. So this is when he was kind of a teenager and a little gawky. And so it's interesting to look back at that scene and think, oh, that's Alfalfa.
Yeah.
Well, the one thing that people had a beef with, that they wrote Frank Capra, they just couldn't get over, was the fact that Mr. Potter does not get his comeuppance for stealing Uncle Billy's $8,000. He doesn't get punished, or so we don't think. This was particularly curious since the film industry at the time was under the Hays Codes, which was a restrictive set of guidelines that Hollywood studios had to regulate the moral content of films. The Hays Code lasted from 1934 to 1968, but the code specifically said that criminals must be punished for their crimes in movies, and Potter, to the naked eye, was not punished. But when you ask Capra about it, he said that it was better to leave it up to the imagination of the viewer to decide
what actually happened.
What karma does to Mr. Potter, which I thought was interesting answer.
That is.
Yeah. So that is my little tidbits of fun facts about It's a Wonderful Life.
I love it. There were so many things I didn't know. So that's very cool. All right. Last film, White Christmas, 1954, directed by Michael Curtiz, written by Norman Krasna, Norman Panama, and Melvin Frank. In case anyone out there hasn't seen this film, I'm going to give you a really quick description. Two war buddies, Bing Crosby and Danny Kaye, who are now a successful song and dance team, join forces with a sister act played by Rosemary Clooney and Vera Ellen to help out the men's former World War II general who is now running a Vermont inn that's at risk of financial failure because there isn't any snow. Now, according to a 1953 New York Times article, the idea for White Christmas actually came from Irving Berlin himself, who suggested that a new motion picture be built around his song. Paramount said yes and called in Norman Krasna to develop the treatment. The film was originally slated to star Bing Crosby and Fred Astaire as a sort of sequel to Paramount's Holiday Inn. Now, tragically, Bing Crosby's first wife, Dixie Lee, passed away from ovarian cancer, so this delayed the original starting date. Now, Astaire ended up dropping out. Some question as to whether Paramount lost Astaire due to the delay, because he had another film he had to do, or because Astaire didn't like the script and couldn't see himself playing a World War II GI. At any rate, whatever the reason was, Astaire is out. So Donald O'Connor is then hired.
Oh, interesting.
But he injured himself. I couldn't find any other specifics on that, and he had to drop out. So Danny Kaye is hired, which necessitated some rewrites on the script. Norman Panama and Melvin Frank, who were the two hottest comedy writers of that time. They wrote for Bob Hope. They wrote for Groucho Marx. I mean, many others. They were brought in to rewrite the script for Danny Kaye because they were friends of his. Curtiz pitched the story to those two writers, and as he's telling the story, he gets to the end and he's crying. He's so invested in how this beautiful final scene happens, which makes the two writers, Panama and Frank, even less enthusiastic about doing the rewrite. But Don Hartman, who was the head of Paramount Studios at the time, convinced them to do it. And according to Panama, in an article written in the 80s, they received practically nothing for the rewrite, and it just kills him because of how often this movie plays.
Oh, no.
Yeah, so they didn't have any kind of
So no residuals, nothing.
No residuals.
Wow.
So back to Irving Berlin. He chose, obviously, all the songs that were to be in the film. He invited Bing Crosby to his home in the desert where he was living at the time to listen to them. But apparently Irving Berlin, think about it, he becomes nervous in front of Bing Crosby and couldn't sing the songs for him.
Oh, no way.
And so Crosby says to him, "Do you like them, Irving?" And Irving Berlin says, "Yes." And Crosby says, "Then they're good enough for me." So he was on board no matter what it was.
Yeah, don't question Irving Berlin.
No,
just
definitely
go with it.
not. Rosemary Clooney was a relative newcomer to films when she was cast. She had appeared in just 3 films prior to White Christmas, and she took the part because she wanted to perform with Bing Crosby. It kicked off a lifetime friendship. She's quoted as saying, "I was so in awe of him." Now, Clooney plays the older sister to Vera Ellen, but Clooney, who was 26, was actually 7 years younger than Vera, who was 33.
Oh, how interesting.
And by the way, some other interesting age discrepancies, because, I love to really rub it in how men were always cast as way older than the women. Crosby was 25 years older than Rosemary Clooney.
Oh, wow.
Dean Jagger, who plays the retired general with the gray hair, he was only a few months older than Crosby. And Danny Kaye, for all you out there, was 43. Vera Ellen, who was one of the youngest Radio City Rockettes. She had appeared in a handful of Broadway musicals and was discovered by Samuel Goldwyn. And she had worked with Danny Kaye in 2 other pictures.
Yeah, she had.
So they had that kind of chemistry right off the bat. She also had already danced with Gene Kelly and Fred Astaire before she joined this film. Her singing in White Christmas was dubbed by Trudy Stevens, although Rosemary Clooney apparently sang both parts on the song Sisters. I found it interesting, though, the only time you actually get to hear Vera's real singing voice is when the 4 of them disembark the train when they're in Vermont and they start singing again the opening lines of Snow, and that's her real voice.
Aw.
Rosemary Clooney, gosh, I wish I could have met her. She's quoted as saying, "White Christmas would be perfect if only they could have dubbed my dancing."
Oh.
Which I thought was so sweet. I think she felt very...
Well, next to Vera Ellen,
my gosh.
anyone's going to feel like they're an inferior dancer.
Of course, of course. And speaking of dancers, next time you watch the film, see if you can spot future Academy Award winner George Chakiris in the musical number at the Carousel Club with Rosemary Clooney.
I have spotted him out before, yes.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah.
And for those who don't know that name, he won the supporting role for Best Actor for his work as Bernardo in West Side Story in 1961. And you talked about alfalfa. Vera Ellen shows a photo to Crosby and Danny Kaye of her brother Benny. The photo is actually of Carl Alfalfa Switzer of Our Gang fame.
We have a little connection of alfalfa.
I know.
I love that.
Legend has it that Irving Berlin was working on a movie in Los Angeles and missed his family in New York. And that's how the song White Christmas came about. Historian Jody Rosen notes that the bittersweet tone of the song may be connected to the tragic death of Berlin's only son on Christmas Day
Oh, no.
in 1928.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. The song won an Academy Award for Best Song. I'm not going to say what picture it was for because that's our pop quiz. He did receive an Academy Award nomination for one of the songs in White Christmas, Count Your Blessings Instead of Sheep, but he did lose that year to 3 Coins in the Fountain.
Oh, tough year.
Now, White Christmas was filmed on Stage 9 on the Paramount lot. It was the first movie that was filmed in VistaVision with Technicolor. Now, VistaVision was a new widescreen format, kind of like 20th Century Fox's CinemaScope. By running the 35mm film through the camera horizontally instead of vertically, VistaVision provided this amazing negative, superior quality. Rosemary Clooney talks about filming in VistaVision and how they initially did it twice. It doubled the work. So Paramount would shoot one take with the standard 35mm, and then they would do one take with VistaVision. But Bing, she's quoted as saying, but Bing hated that, and it was decided to just do VistaVision. That was that. Bing wouldn't put up with it.
When Bing decides, that's it.
Exactly.
How are you going to go against Bing Crosby?
Yeah. I did find in a book about Michael Curtiz, which we'll note in the sources, a Paramount production memo detailing they were so worried about him running over budget. And, he had already had so many
such a
hits.
track record.
Yeah, exactly. So it details the number of feet of film he's using for each scene, essentially warning that between Curtiz and Crosby and Kay, who like to fool around in terms of improvising, the film was going to go over budget. The second pressure in terms of money was that there was an enormous PR campaign that Paramount had set at $800,000, which for back in the day, that was a lot of money.
That was a lot of money back then.
Speaking of which, Crosby and Berlin each had 33 1/3% of the profits of the film.
My gosh.
With Paramount getting the rest.
Can you imagine what the intake was on that?
Right. So when Danny Kaye comes in, remember I said he was kind of last minute. He must have had an amazing agent because Crosby and Berlin end up giving up 5% of their share to give Danny Kaye 10%.
Wow.
So Astaire and O'Connor dropping out just made the whole production schedule so tight that Danny Kaye kind of had him over a barrel. So he also took home a nice paycheck, Danny Kaye, $250,000, more than Crosby's paycheck, which was $150,000, and more than director Curtiz's, which was $186,000. But I think Bing Crosby was just very smart and knew getting a back end.
The back end was going to be so much more lucrative than just upfront money. Yeah.
Now, lest you think that Paramount was being generous giving away all these percentages, the deal was that they had to recoup all their costs before anybody got any profits. The costs were estimated at about $2 million for the film. In its original run, the film brought in over $12 million, which adjusted for inflation would be $137 million today.
Wow.
Yeah. And as some perspective on the television rights, which is how I learned of the film when we were kids,
that's
right?
Exactly how I saw it first.
NBC aired White Christmas in 1967 and paid $950,000 for 3 exposures.
Wow.
I know. Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
Apparently, Crosby, jumping back to him, he was always in charge on the set, even with celebrated Curtiz as the director. Sometimes he would just disappear, Crosby. He'd say, I'm going over the wall. Nobody knew where he went and nobody asked. But he did meet his second wife, Catherine Grandstaff, later known as Catherine Grant, while he was filming this movie because she was a contract player at Paramount. So I think that's where he disappeared to.
That's where he was going, of course, going over to the other side of the lot to see the starlet.
Exactly. Just 2 other really quick things. Clooney recalls that Bing Crosby and Danny Kaye got along really great, both on screen and off. She's quoted as saying, Danny brought out the sense of the ridiculous in Bing. There was one take when Bing just broke up while they were lip-syncing Sisters to Our Voices, when Danny hit Bing in the stomach with the fan. Bing just started to laugh. They did another take and printed them both, but they used the one where Bing broke up. And I, as a kid, don't you remember watching that scene and going, I don't think he's supposed to be doing that. And it was
so,
Yeah.
a natural reaction.
Exactly.
Yes.
So fun.
Yeah.
Finally, in 1985, the film was released on VHS for the first time. Remember VHS?
Oh, yeah.
And at Danny Kaye's suggestion, Paramount donated thousands of VHS tapes to children's hospitals across the country.
Oh, how lovely.
Isn't that lovely?
Thank you, Danny Kaye.
Yes.
It's interesting, too, if I'm not mistaken, the young actress who played the Colonel's daughter,
yes,
her name was Anne Whitfield. She just passed away this year.
Did she?
And she was an interesting woman. She didn't act for very long, but then she ended up becoming this real advocate for women's rights and climate change and homelessness. I mean, she really lived an extraordinary life beyond Hollywood. So,
wow.
And she just left us, I think, this year.
Wow, that's wonderful. Well, this has been so much fun. I'm so excited now to dive into some Christmas movies. And
it's time. I'm ready.
Get in the spirit.
Roast those chestnuts. So I think now it's probably time for the answer to our pop quiz. Nan?
And the question was, the song White Christmas appeared in how many films, and can you name the films?
Well, obviously there's Holiday Inn.
Yes.
And then there's White Christmas.
Right.
And then you lost me.
Okay. The third film it appeared in was Blue Skies.
Oh.
Also with Fred Astaire.
Oh, right. That's right.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
So a total of 3.
I love that.
Yeah.
Well, it's a good song.
Well, thanks everyone for listening. We would so appreciate it if you would give us a 5-star review. And if you would follow us on social media. Our handle is @FromBeneathTheHollywoodSign. We are on Facebook, Instagram, and you can watch the podcast on YouTube.
And we love your emails. Please keep them coming. You can write us at info@FromBeneathTheHollywoodSign.com.
That's this week's view.
From Beneath the Hollywood Sign.
You've been listening to From Beneath the Hollywood Sign with Steve Cubine and Ann McNamara, the podcast that celebrates amazing stories of Tinseltown from its golden era. Join us next week for another episode and learn something else about Hollywood you probably never knew. Take a moment and give us a 5-star rating and a positive review, and tell your friends about us too. It'll help grow the podcast. Visit Steve's website at FromBeneathTheHollywoodSign.com. The executive producers are Steve Cubine and Nan McNamara. Executive producer and post-production supervisor Lindsay Schnebley. Associate producer and researcher John Price Ritchie. This podcast is part of the Airwave Media Podcast Network. Visit airwavemedia.com to listen and subscribe to their other fine shows like The Box of Oddities and The Shallow End with Schnebley and Toth. Copyright 2024, all rights reserved. That's a wrap.
Welcome.
It's hard.
It's hard to talk.
Talking's hard.